Now to the record-breaking heat in the eastern United States. A so-called heat dome brought high temperatures and humidity to cities from Portland, Maine to Washington, D.C. CGTN's Jim Spellman reports.
Summer has just begun, but already tens of millions in the U.S. are sweltering under record high temperatures.
It's raging hot. I woke up this morning on personal trainer, so just getting on the train and coming into the city, humidity was ridiculous.
Meteorologists say a system known as a heat dome has been parked over much of the eastern United States.
We know that hot air likes to rise. So in general, hot air is rising, but it reaches this dome of high pressure that is forcing it downward, causing it to compress and further heat. So it's kind of this continual cycle where the air is rising and sinking, and as it sinks, it heats more and more.
At least 7 states have seen record-breaking or tying temperatures. Boston topped 38 degrees Celsius, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, breaking its record for the month of June.
Humid, that's the worst, the humidity. The heat sucks, but the humidity is what makes you sweat and feel sticky, and I don't like it.
Across the Midwest, roads have been cracking under the extreme heat. Trains have been forced to slow since the heat can cause rails to expand. Lakes and pools are packed as people try to find relief for themselves and their pets.
The worst thing for them, I think it's the pavement. It gets really, really hot.
But this could be just the beginning of a long, hot summer for many in the United States. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
For more on the oppressive heat, let's bring in our next guest here in our Washington, D.C. studio. Seema Wadhwa is the founder of Health in Climate Voices and was recognized by Time magazine in 2023 as one of the 100 most influential climate leaders. And from Virginia, Michael Shank is an adjunct professor of sustainable development at New York University. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Michael, let me start with you. This week's heat wave in the eastern part of the United States smashed numerous records, not just for a single day, but for any time in June. And the United States National Weather Service said Baltimore's Inner Harbor soared to 40 degrees Celsius. That's just 2 degrees shy of Death Valley in California. How unusual is this, and what's driving these high temperatures, and should we get used to it? Is this becoming the new normal?
Well, as you note, this is becoming the new normal, unfortunately. So every year we're breaking new records in terms of heat records, and every year summer is getting longer. So this is record-breaking, as you note, for June to experience these levels of heat. And it brings with it a whole bunch of problems because people die from heat. Heat is a real killer. 500,000 people globally are dying from heat, so that's a problem. And it's killing more than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes combined. So heat is the big killer that we will see year on year. Now, there are many ways we can reduce that problem and reduce emissions, which are causing this global warming that we're seeing year on year. We can get to that later in the segment. But yes, what we're seeing now, unfortunately, will become the new normal. And that humidity that was referred to in the segment, hotter air holds more moisture. And so we get more torrential downpours as a result as well. So we'll see more flooding too coming with those heat waves.
Seema, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. If we look at some of the cases, how people have been affected by heat around the country, we look at New Jersey, for instance, there were more than 100 people who became ill during outdoor graduation ceremonies over the past few weeks. It's, of course, graduation season right now in the United States. New York City's health department says it logged more than 112 visits to hospital emergency rooms for heat-related illnesses. Are we going to see a lot more of this as temperatures rise?
Anand, thank you so much for having me. And, absolutely, as Michael also referenced to, these heat waves that we're seeing, it's not just that they'll be more frequent, but they will also be more extreme. And, with the heat, the thing that we'll also see with it is some of the challenges from a health perspective, whether that is cardiovascular related issues, whether that is related to kidney issues. And, what's really unfortunate is we don't have a true account of understanding not only all the ways that heat is impacting our health, but also the financial implications that stem from that. We've had over 235,000 admissions to ERs annually stemming from heat. and over 50,000 hospital admissions. And right now, when we look at the economic overview of how this is accounted for, it's not really part of the picture. So, as we talk further about some of those solutions Mike mentioned, better accounting for the financial implications will also help us better understand and prepare, looking at where it makes sense to make investments to protect ourselves and those that we love.
Yeah, Seema, that's an alarming figure that you mentioned there. 235,000 visits for heat-related issues. I mean, when we look at this, if we had to rank how climate change impacts our daily lives, I mean, how high would heat be? Is it more risky, more dangerous than, say, flooding or hurricanes?
It absolutely is. I think when people think about natural disasters, climate-driven events, the images that come to their mind are those of these hurricanes like those we saw earlier in the year, where there's a lot of loss of infrastructure. But truly, the extreme heat, as Michael also shared, is the greatest threat when it comes to health, even more than those hurricanes and those floods. And, I'll say in some ways it's a silent threat, because, when you think of the beach, you think of the heat, it doesn't come across as dangerous. But our bodies are not meant to sustain these levels of heat. And, it's not just that it gets really hot during the day. One of the important other factors is we're not seeing the nighttime cooling anymore. And our bodies need that cycle to really rejuvenate and refresh and be healthy. So, I think unfortunately we are just now starting to understand all of the critical nature that extreme heat is causing, driven by climate change.
Michael, talking about how prepared the United States is to meet these challenges, Seema mentioned a moment ago the impact that it's having on infrastructure. I mean, we've seen incidences over the past few weeks of buckling roads. We've seen broken bridges. There's also now speed reductions on railway lines because of the heat. There's also a major strain on the country's power grid. So how prepared is the country for this?
Well, as Seema noted, these are major hits to our economic productivity. As you noted, Anand, these are hitting our transportation systems, our power systems. So if we're not motivated to save lives from heat as the killer, from climate change, hopefully we're motivated by the hits to economic productivity, as you noted, and as Seema noted. In terms of the U.S. being prepared, we have a lot of work to do. Thankfully, a lot of cities are rolling out chief heat officers to focus on this work. They're rolling out resilience hubs and cooling centers to help people cool down. But we still have a lot of room to grow and go in terms of heat safety protocols, heat standards for workers who have to work outside in this heat, and also heat disaster declarations so that we can mobilize the national government's resources to respond to heat moments and heat domes like we're seeing on the East Coast. But in terms of how ready the U.S. is, I mean, we're seeing roads buckling and trains slowing. So that's some illustration of how much work we have to do.
Michael, you have written about focusing on people's everyday concerns, things like high energy bills, the fact that housing's become unaffordable right now. And we see the high costs of healthcare, for instance. Add to all that, of course, inflation that we see. I mean, make that connection for us between these concerns and climate change.
What I encourage everyone to do in their cities, if they're living in a city or in an urban area or even in a rural area, is to do an audit of your city. Look around. See what's making your city hotter. Likely it's cars and trucks that are burning fossil fuels, which are causing global warming, which is making your city hotter, but also other things that were already mentioned in the segment, like pavement, because that's absorbing the heat and then emitting it by you as you walk down the sidewalk. And then do an audit of your city and see what's making it cooler. Obviously trees, more shade, green roofs, which we're rolling out more and more. But cities in the US and globally are rolling out spray parks and water parks and opening pools, public pools for longer into the evening because people need to cool down. So there are lots of ways you can make your city cooler. So if your city is barren, without treescape, without any kind of canopy, without any kind of green space, advocate locally for your city or urban area to roll out more trees, especially in disadvantaged neighborhoods, underrepresented neighborhoods where there's a lot more pavement, a lot less tree canopy. to keep the communities cool. So there's a lot we can do. Now, in terms of your own house retrofit, to keep your house cooler, to lower your energy bill, as you noted, Anand, there's a lot you can do there too in terms of weatherizing your house so that AC isn't escaping, but also electrifying so that you're lowering your bill with a heat pump, perhaps solar if you can afford it. So there's a lot we can do at the city level, at the household level to cool our communities.
Seema, what about the impact that these extreme conditions have on specific groups, like people who suffer from asthma, for instance, or people who have allergies? I mean, how does air quality affect them? What happens to air quality when we have rising temperatures?
That's a great question. There is absolutely, a direct link between heat and air quality. And, as it relates to those populations you've mentioned, unfortunately, climate change really does hit the vulnerable more severely than others. One fact I'd love to share is that for pregnant women, those that are exposed to extreme heat in their last trimester, those children, it's not just that mother or that child is impacted at that moment. Those children are born with lower birth weights, and they're born preterm more often. So, when we look at our populations that are most vulnerable, are elderly, right? Oftentimes, elderly people are living alone. They're, they sometimes have more economic challenges. They can't run their AC. It really puts an unequivocal risk and burden on those populations especially.
So let's talk about some of the remedies. I mean, what would you like to see being done to build safer environments to start with, and perhaps then healthier communities?
Great question. Well, the first thing I would actually suggest we focus on is really identifying and helping people understand that climate change is a health issue. Oftentimes, when people think about climate change, the first visual that comes to their minds are polar bears and ice caps, right? But if we start to shift the dialogue and help people understand when we're talking about climate change, we are talking about asthma, we are talking about extreme heat, we are talking about cardiovascular disease. I think that first level of mindset shift is what needs to change to drive people's action. And, I think the second layer to that is putting the economic value to the challenges we're seeing. If we can put a dollar amount on this that people can really understand, it will drive some of the last piece, the infrastructure changes, whether that is, investing in more cooling stations, better preparing for yourself, many of the ways that Michael talked about, or broad infrastructure such as, more green roofs, more cooling surfaces. But I think before we get, we can get those large systematic changes, it's time to shift our mindset.
And there is a political challenge in the United States as well. Hey.
I think the greatest way to overcome that is for people to understand this is not something beyond them. It's not something in the future. It's here, it's now, and it's happening to you and to your families.
Okay, Michael, I've got a little bit of time left, about a minute. I want to talk about COP30. That takes place in Brazil later this year, in November. What are your expectations?
Well, what we saw in Bonn recently is that countries are committing to 10% increase in climate financing and support, which is great at a time when the UN is getting cut across most sectors. We're seeing a boost in climate financing, and that was agreed to at Bonn. BRICS are leading the way in many ways. If the U.S. is stepping back from a leadership role, we're seeing other countries step into a leadership role. China, of course, is certainly leading in renewable energy, but also in committing to making sure data centers are being powered by renewable energy, something I wrote on recently. But I'm seeing leapfrogging happening around the world in places like Ukraine, where they're becoming more energy secure too. So we're seeing a lot of incredible movement around the globe, which I think will be a good drumbeat for COP30.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Michael Shanks, Seema Wadhwa, thanks so much for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C.